Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today, you'll meet Robin Anderson. Robin is the Director of Programs and Communications at the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. Growing up on a grain farm in south central Saskatchewan as the oldest of 4 children, Robin's passion for farm safety and health began at a young age. Her journey took her from youth ambassador with the Saskatchewan Safety Council Power Pack program to becoming an influential advocate dedicated to improving the lives of farmers and farm families across Canada. In our conversation today, Robin shares her inspiring story and discusses why farm safety is not just a job, but a vital community mission. We'll dive into the unique challenges farmers face, such as constant pressure of time and mental health struggles, and explore essential topics like the interconnectedness of sleeping, nutrition, and well-being. We also address specific safety challenges faced by women in agriculture, including the importance of tailored personal protective equipment and managing the emotional weight of ensuring safety on the farm. Robin shares impactful success stories highlighting the positive changes brought by effective training and community engagement. Plus, Robin gives us a look ahead at exciting initiatives like Kid Farm Safe Week and upcoming safety forums aimed at making farms safer for everyone. I cannot wait for you to meet Robin and hear all of the insightful information she has for us about keeping us safe on farms. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Robin. Robin, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me, Caitlin. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about things that are passionate to me.
I am very excited to dive in with you, Robin. I had the pleasure of meeting you last year at a conference in person and heard a little bit about your story and was very intrigued to learn all about your story. So I'm happy to have you back. And for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, Robin, give us your background. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what your connection to agriculture is.
Well, my name is Robin Anderson, and I am a farm kid from Saskatchewan. I grew up on a farm in south central Saskatchewan, grain farm, small grain farm, with my folks, and I have 3 younger siblings. So, I suffer from eldest daughter syndrome, right? Mother hen, making sure everybody's, got everything they need and looking after them and, just kind of being that third parent, growing up on the farm. So, I grew up on the farm and, agriculture was really, who we were. It was a big part of our identity, right? Being farm kids. Growing up with farm kids, riding the bus, 2 hours a day to go to a rural school. Very sheltered in that way, right? But a really great way to grow up, right? Understanding how our food has grown and having that community built right into it. And, as I grew up, I really realized that, the well-being of the people that grew our food is, one of the most important things to me. It was always, interesting, when we were growing up, we would hear about, people being injured on the farm or hurt. My dad had an incident himself, losing part of a finger. My brother was in an incident. My sister was in an incident. And not life-changing, but definitely something that is core memories. Things that you go, oh gosh, yeah, that really impacts you. And, so growing up, I was always really worried about people, their safety and well-being, on our farm especially, but our neighbors and friends and those sorts of things. And when I was about 15 years old, the Saskatchewan Safety Council came out with a great program called the Power Pack, and it was sponsored by Sask Power, and it was about youth talking to other kids about farm safety. And my mom saw the ad and she said, oh gosh, you are such a worrywart. This is right up your alley. You are just always so worried about everybody else and how they're doing. So, she was like, you need to apply. And I did. And, I found a real passion for it. I thought, this is great. Like being able to, have this attention of these kids to talk about something that I was really passionate about. And that was their well-being, as they're growing up on the farm. And that kind of morphed. I went to school in Saskatoon, the University of Saskatchewan. And after university, I was really privileged to join the Regina Copal Health Region as a farm safety coordinator. And, really getting my feet wet and learned a lot. I was such a newbie, being so young, trying to understand, what are the impacts? What does it look like for farmers? How do their safety and well-being, how is that impacted by what they do for a living? How is that impacted by, women working a job off farm, working on farm, looking after children, right? Like that third shift, for women on the farm, for kids on the farm, right? The expectation of, school and extracurricular and then being on the farm as well, and of course, primary farmers as well. So that was a really great, huge learning experience for me. And, life just happened and I ended up moving out to the East Coast with my husband and spending some time out there. And then we moved back to the prairies to Winnipeg. And the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association was hiring for a communications coordinator for maternity leave. And I thought, it's a sign. And I applied and got the job. And, I've been with them ever since. So that was 11 years ago now. And my job has changed. I'm now the director of programs and communications at the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. So a lot more responsibility, but my passion has continued to grow and I learn something new every day. But I'm able to really, take that, heritage of mine, that Century Farm family, that idea of that, and moving that into a place where, I feel like I'm, bringing my best foot forward in for those folks that do grow our food, that do work such long hours, who do have such care and passion for, the land and for their animals. So I'm really privileged that I get to serve, the agricultural industry in the way that I do.
Robin, you have such a passion for farm safety. And I love that, meeting you in person, I could just tell the passion that you had. But hearing that you are the eldest daughter from a grain farm, like it is all making sense to me and it's coming full circle for me. Talk to me about the youth program that you were a part of. What kind of initiatives and conversations were you able to have at that young age that helped impact farm safety for other fellow kids on farms?
There was such a great program. It was the coordinator. Her name is Judy George, and Judy is still a dear friend, a mentor. She read a reading at my wedding. So there was this beautiful woman who just was so passionate about this idea of kids, and we were literal kids, right? Like teenagers, getting trained up, getting understanding how to talk to children about farm safety. So she managed to build this program from scratch. She gave us training. She gave us the information we needed. And it was pretty old school, right? We've got to remember, this is like the 90s, late 90s, overhead projectors, right? Like remember those films that you put on the overhead projectors? We had pictures and, we gave out tattoos. And it was just, such an interesting way to really kind of get exposed to agriculture in Saskatchewan. And I think at one time I had figured out I had spoken to something like 50,000 kids, because I was so passionate about it. That's all I really wanted to do. And I continued to do it through university, even into working with the health region. I did a little bit of speaking for the Power Pack program. And, it was so cool to see all of these kids from all over the province come to these trainings. So we had kids from, up by Prince Albert, south, like by Oxbow and Estevan, Maple Creek to Melville and Yorkton, and all over the province all came together, and, we're trained, got to know each other, got to build those friendships. And I'm still friends with folks that were in the program to this day. And this has been like 30 years almost, to just really understand, how we as children could impact other kids, right? And having those conversations. And, it really developed a lot of skills in myself too. Public speaking, time management. I can read a map very well. Not that you need it anymore, but man, you find in Munster, Saskatchewan on a map on grid roads, those sorts of skills, like you really develop them, traveling all over the countryside with, look to go talk to the kids at school about farm safety. So, it was such a really good program and so valuable. And I owe a lot to, Judy George and the Saskatchewan Safety Council, that's for sure.
And I just think, like, what a brilliant idea to have kids speak to other kids, right? Like, it's one thing for, your parent or an adult on a farm to tell you, don't do that, that's dangerous. But in the eyes of a kid, sometimes we think, well, our parents think everything is dangerous, right? Like, we should be bubble wrapped. But when it's a kid talking to another kid, I think there's a way that we can communicate in which they can understand that, hey, maybe jumping in that grain bin isn't such a great idea, right? And you don't, as you get older, hopefully your mind adapts to think of things differently. But when you are a kid and thinking like a kid, we might not do things that would be, quote, smart to do.
No, absolutely. And, and sometimes, even as parents grow, raising kids on the farm, we sometimes are overestimated in our ability for farm kids, right? Like my brother, for example, he was probably born 30 years old, but he was still a kid, right? He was still very much a child. But my parents really had faith in him. They really thought that he, at very tender ages, just had a lot of ability. And he did to some extent, but he was still very much a child. And, the risks that were taken, are not appropriate. They weren't appropriate then, they're not appropriate now. Those injuries, those close calls, those sorts of things. And we think, it's just part of growing up on the farm. It really isn't, right? Putting the lives of children at risk. It's really heartbreaking, right? To see the stats, seeing under fours being ran over. Under 4-year-olds have the highest rate of deaths on Canadian farms, other than anybody over the age of 60. So, being able to talk to kids as a kid and being like, sometimes, we might think that it's okay. And maybe our moms and dads maybe they don't see that it's not safe and it's okay to say something. Right. Even being able to encourage kids to speak up and say, hey, I know we've lived with this for a long time and we did it on our farm. And it's okay to talk about it, right? And say, hey, mom and dad, I've noticed that maybe, this doesn't really seem that safe, So empowering kids, right, to be able to speak up, because I think, parents are doing the best they can. They're doing what they can with what they've got. And, we always appreciate that, right? That's true. Like, I see my brothers are both raising kids on the farm and they're doing their darn best. And those kids are happy, healthy, and safe, most of the time. Occasionally, there are things that can be improved. Absolutely. That's just like in everybody's life. But I appreciate that. And I think that it's just really great to be able to empower folks, children, including children, to be able to talk about that stuff that's happening on their farms.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to get into your role with the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. What is the mission for your organization, and what are you hoping to achieve with farmers in Canada?
So CASA is a mission, and I'm going to read it to you because I can't remember it off the top of my head ever, is to engage with community partners to promote safety and health in agriculture, but by providing leadership, support, and resources. And what that really means is that we work with partners in order to reduce and eliminate farm injuries across Canada. That's really what that boils down to, right? So, we're a really small not-for-profit. You have 1/4 of our staff with you here today. There's 4 staff. We're a really small organization. We're itty bitty, so we are very small. And we really depend on those boots on the ground organizations, our provincial partners, those people that are doing that work on the ground, to bring that health and safety, to folks. So we work with those folks, through campaigns and programs to bring the information and resources that we need to improve health and safety on Canadian farms. The reality is we're seeing about 60 people killed in agriculture-related incidents a year in Canada. And, I always joke, I would love not to have a job. I could do something else. I could. There's no problem. I could do something else. If we had no injuries and deaths on farms, I would be happy to do something else. So it's all about making sure that those farms and farm families are thriving, successful, and sustainable. Well, I just mentioned my family farm has been in our family for over 100 years, since 1905. But the reality is if we are not, addressing the issues, at that farm gate level, health and safety, mental health, we aren't going to see those farms continue to thrive and succeed. So for me, it's all about keeping farm families healthy and safe for the next generation.
Absolutely. And when I think of the number, like that you had mentioned, the average number of deaths that happen on farms, in the totality of it, it doesn't seem like a lot. But when we think of 60, I think of 60 businesses and farms being affected by that number. And if those 60 people were owner operators of these farms, does that mean 60 of our farms in our country are going under, right? Are not able to produce the food or the resources or any of those things that we need in this world to keep going, right? And like you said, wouldn't you just love to have a different job? Maybe like you could do anything else. But the fact that, farm safety affects all of us every single day. We all make choices on our operations every single day that will affect our health and safety, whether it's physical or whether it's mental. You talked a lot about the different partnerships that you have, which obviously are super important to a small organization like yours. What are some of the programs that you and your partners have been able to implement, and what have been some of the greatest impacts that you've seen come from these partnerships?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have some flagship programs that we're so proud of that, we've worked really hard to get them off the ground. One that I work on every year is Canadian Agricultural Safety Week, and that's held on the 3rd week of March of every year. And that is really just a celebration of farm safety. We try not to talk too much about the negative and the sad. Everybody wants to rubberneck. I'm included in that. I want to know all the details. I love the rubberneck. But when we promote happy, healthy success, we can strive towards happy, healthy success. So Canadian Agricultural Safety Week is always about, how can we celebrate what we're doing right, and how can we do those things even more right, and how do we lift up those parts of, that we're not doing so great in. So that's one program we work on. Something that's upcoming right away is our new. This will be our 2nd year doing it, is Kids Farm Safe Week, and that was really in response to that Canadian Cultural Injury Reporting data that we got in 2020, well, including 2020. That talks about kids under 4 and their rates of death. That was really quite jarring. Unfortunately, not surprising, but very jarring to see that, we're seeing so many young children being ran over on the farm. And that's generally how they're being killed, is being ran over. And so in response to that, we thought, you know what, let's just start celebrating kids on the farm. And how do we get kids more involved in talking about farm safety? How do we get parents to talk about farm safety? How do we get schools to talk about farm safety more across this country? And so, Kids Farm Safe Week was born out of that. So, working towards, having resources and information and those sorts of things available. And something else that we've started in about 2017 was our Be Grain Safe program. And Be Grain Safe, was born out of the need of seeing increased grain entrapments across Canada. larger yields, better equipment, faster moving augers, things like that. Gone are the days of the 6-inch auger, right? Like that. Those don't really, we're not seeing a lot of that, but we're seeing a lot more, bushels being moved per second, through equipment and things like that. So we were seeing increased entrapments and engulfments due to grain. So Be Grain Safe has a two-pronged approach. One is the prevention side of things, and then one is the training side of things. Of course, the best way to keep someone from dying in grain is keeping them out of grain. So that's where the prevention side comes in. So we have our Be Grain Safe Week in August. We have lots of resources and information about, those sorts of things, keeping grain in good condition, making sure the bins are ready to accept grain as harvest happens, those sorts of things. And then we also have our Be Grain Safe trailer, and it travels the country. So it goes from east to west one year and west to east the other year. And it trains rural fire departments on and how to extract someone safely from grain. And that's been a real great program. We've seen actually 3 successful rescues of folks that have taken part in that grain rescue training. And that's just what we know of. There could be more, we don't know. But I mean, the fact that 3 people's lives have been saved because of the knowledge that we've been able to, give to these folks on the ground has been incredible. So those are some of our major programs that we do. And we also have other programs like our Back to Egg program, which is funded by Farm Credit Canada. And it helps traumatically injured farmers get back to farming safely. So we're able to provide a grant up to $20,000 for technology. So we've done things like sit-to-stand wheelchairs, cattle handling systems, those sorts of things. So that's also a really great program that we're really proud of. And we also have things like our Canadian Agriculture Injury Reporting, which is the best data on agricultural fatalities in the world. And it is done because we have an incredibly dedicated cohort that goes to coroners' offices and does extraction of death data. So we know where to focus a lot of energy. So that's how we know how underforaged are getting killed in agriculture. That sort of thing. So it's very good data. The worst part is about the data is we don't actually know about things like life-altering injuries or lost time injuries or close calls that we can't track. So we don't know what those look like just because of the nature of being able to track that data. But that is also an incredibly important program. And care data gets used across the world. It's world-class, and we're really, really proud of that as well.
Robin, your organization does so many things to keep us safe. And I want to take a minute to say thank you for that. As a farmer myself, and as a new farmer, I didn't recognize and realize how many dangers there is in my absolute everyday life here on the farm and the work that we're doing. What do you think? This is coming from, I guess, your time on a grain farm as well as your time in your role. What are some of the biggest challenges that is facing farm safety from the farmer's perspective and from your perspective from the data that you've seen?
I think it's time, pressure. There's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many sunny days. There's only so many days that are frost-free. There's only so much energy, right? So when you're out and about, and I think you can speak to this better than I can, Caitlin, but when you're out there and you're like, I got to get this crop off. I haven't slept in 18 hours. I don't know the last time I ate. Man, I've been drinking Mountain Dew for 15 hours straight just to stay awake. So I think about that. I think about that pressure, that is a lot of pressure to have when you are, running your own business. And and it's just not just even farm work. And then it's like, I got to do these taxes. I got to figure out what our inputs are. My gosh, I got to talk to the bank again. Oh man, what does this look like for the markets? That pressure is incredible. It is incredible for our farmers and our farm families. That is a lot of pressure. And so sometimes we become complacent. We take shortcuts. We go, oh man, I know that PTO needs a guard on it. I do not have the time for it right now. I'm just going to work around it. It'll be fine. Oh man, I know I should lower that auger. We're going underneath that power line, but it's been fine before. I got to get this done. We got to go. I really should drink some water. I really should have a good sleep. But you know what? We don't have time for that right now. So I think time pressure, emotional pressure, stress has a lot to do with sometimes shortcuts we might take, choices we might make that we might not normally make. I think that happens a lot depending on kids because there's just so much work and only so many hands. Even things like, oh man, someone's got to go check those cows. We've got calves coming. I got no daycare. I got to take the kids with me, right? Like there's just a lot of like hurdles, pressure, time restraints, stress that can really lead to folks, making choices they might not normally take, taking shortcuts, the fatigue factor, just the sheer exhaustion factor, driving a piece of equipment down the road, forgetting to put the lights on, forgetting to signal, forgetting to shoulder check, forgetting, being like, there's nobody here to be a flag vehicle. I got to get this moved. Oh, it'll fit on those railroad tracks. It's fine. I'm not going to get stuck, right? So there's a lot of hazards out there that if we don't mitigate those hazards right from the get-go, they become real problems, right? Or taking risks that we might not normally take. So from my perspective, it is a lot of different things that lead to, incidents and injuries and unfortunately deaths.
Absolutely. Well, and you said it well. These things have worked good enough before, so why don't they just keep working good enough to continue, right? I think we all have work to do on our respective operations, and it does take time to implement some of these things. But like you said, these things are important because what could take 15 minutes to fix now could save essentially a life later, right? And having those conversations, I think, with farm families and workers on the farm, right? Like people that are not directly involved with your everyday to day business, they come and do their job and they go home at the end of the night. Like, let's make sure that everybody gets to do that regardless of what their position is on the farm.
Yeah, your listeners can't see me nod vigorously. Yes, I'm agreeing. Yeah, and it's also really good business sense when you think about it, right? Because lost time, you lose time, you can't gain that time back, and that's what'll happen if you even a lost time injury, right? I have to go get stitches. Well, it's not life altering, but it does take half a day.
Mm-hmm.
Got to drive into town. The locum's got to come in. You got to get the stitches. You know what I mean? So that does take time, right? And then of course you've got the stitches you got to keep clean and deal with, right? So even that kind of stuff, if we can prevent those injuries from happening in the first place, it's really good business sense. And you did mention this earlier, and there was a paper done. It's a bit dated now, but it talked about, the death of a primary producer. And the death of a primary producer often means the end of the farm. So even thinking about it in that aspect, losing the whole farm, because of a preventable, death, that's extremely tragic in my opinion. It's just tragic that, we're losing family farms because of things that are very preventable. So, hazard mitigation, when you're not really busy, which is not now. We're getting into seeding, it's not now. It's before this, right? Where we can take some time and go, oh yeah, you know what? Equipment maintenance. Let's make sure the slow moving vehicle sign looks good. It's fixed. I'll do our lights work. How are our shields? How are these things working out? I've been meaning to fill that hole because someone's going to trip in it. I got to clean up the shop because we've got all these tripping hazards and flammable hazards that we've got to look after. So taking that time before you get really busy to just mitigate as many risks as you can, right? There's a hierarchy of hazard control. So eliminating risks is like the first thing you can do to prevent injuries, right? So just get rid of them. Like, let's eliminate risks or eliminate hazards. I'm sorry. So looking at those sorts of things, being like, what can we do to make our lives easier and safer, right? Before you get too busy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we mentioned a bit, we're talking a lot about our physical health, but why is mental health important farm safety for the farm? And how is CASA and their partners working to improve the health and safety in the mental health sense?
This is a really good question. And it's something that CASA has worked on for a long time. CASA started in 1993. So when you and I were both still very young pups, I think, at that point. And there was a really great conversation out of the University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Jim Dosman, who's the grandfather of agricultural health and medicine. And he talks about sleepless in Saskatchewan. He talks about sleep and what kind of impact sleep has on our health, our mental health, and our physical health. And so that this has been a bit of a conversation, maybe not in the way we talk about it now, but for a really long time. So we think about things like even just sleep, something like sleep, which is a very physical thing to do, but it also impacts our mental health, like to an extreme event. I don't know about you, but when I don't get enough sleep, I am very cranky. I'm very hungry. I make really bad choices. I have a bad temper. There are a lot of things that I do when I do not sleep well, right? That I wouldn't normally do when I'm well rested. So we talk about things like sleep and how that impacts not only our mental health, but our physical health. And that's really intertwined. Also things like nutrition, we also talk about that. Eating well, right? That impacts both our mental health and our physical health. So we talk about that a lot. And then we talk about things like stress, right? And what we can control, what we can't control. So it's really important to kind of differentiate those two things. I can't do anything about the markets. Absolutely nothing. There's nothing I can do. But I can, manage my time in a way that works best for me. That I can do. So those sorts of things. And, CASA is really, really lucky to work with such great partners like the Canadian the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing, CCAW, Do More Ag. AgSafe BC is doing a lot of really great stuff in the mental health area. And we actually have on our website our hub, our mental health hub, where we try to collate, because sometimes people just don't know where to go. Where do I go for this information? I don't know where to go to have this conversation about, manage it, interpersonal relationships on the farm. That's causing me a lot of stress. Where can I go to find out this information? I need something in French. Where do I go for something in French? And we try to put everything in that hub so people can go on our website and go, oh, okay, this is what I need. This is the area where I'm looking for, and that sort of thing. And also just being honest about it, talking about mental health. Everybody has mental health, right? We all do. And just like our physical health, sometimes our mental health is great. Sometimes it's maybe not so great. And that's okay, right? That's okay. It is totally okay. So being able to just be like, yeah, you know what? That's totally fine. Understood. We got you, and having that hub and being able to point folks in the right direction about where they might need help. That's really important to us. And, and like I said, just being able to talk about it, right? And being like, hey, it's okay. Everybody has struggles. Everybody goes through highs and lows, and that's totally fine.
Everybody doesn't always get enough sleep all the time, and perhaps has some of the things that you mentioned, like it's a little cranky the next day, this host included. So it's like you said, everybody has mental health, and let's work all together to make it mental wellness. And how can we be well, and what are the tools that we need? So we're going to link everything about the hub and everything in the show notes so people can find that and use that as a resource. I want to talk about the unique safety challenges that women face in a farm setting and what CASA has done, or what some tips and tricks we have to keep all of the women's safe on the farm.
That's a great question. We actually worked with Farm Management Canada to do a study because we're like, okay, we'd like to hear, from women about, what are some of the challenges that they're facing. And, it was pretty interesting to kind of hear what they had to say. And, a lot of it was things that, we kind of had heard of, or, very much so. It was things like, I don't need a pink set of coveralls. I actually just need a set of coveralls that fit. I don't need pink gloves. I just need gloves that fit. So PPE, right? A PPE that fits, that's appropriate, that makes sense for women on the farm. That was definitely came up. Some other things that were interesting that came up were things like women carrying the burden of safety, right? They're the ones that are always like, hey, that doesn't seem like that's going to be okay. So having to carry that burden of safety on the farm and being the voice of reason, so to speak, about safety on the farm. And then things like, childcare, making sure children are safe on the farm, very stressful, for women, when they're thinking about their own safety. And when I talk at Advancing Women, where I met you, I had a really great conversation with a lady, and she was talking, and she was facing silage, and her older kids and her 3-year-old were at home, and they live on the same yard as the grandparents. And she was like, okay, your 3-year-old brother is still sleeping. Can you just make sure you keep an eye on him? I got to go out and do this farm work. I can't, be in 2 places at one time, right? So she's out there doing something that is potentially quite hazardous. And all of a sudden she gets a phone call on her cell phone, and her teenager can't find the 3-year-old. So there she is trying to do something dangerous. And now she's worried about where her 3-year-old is. So she's put herself at risk because now she's stressing about where her kid is. And of course, the kid could very well be at risk because she doesn't know where he is. So that combination, right, of that stress and that worry, and then also the real risk of her putting herself in danger, and or that child being in danger. Luckily, he had wandered over to grandma's. Grandma had him. Everything was fine. But that concern, that worry, that pressure, that responsibility for women on the farm is immense. That's a lot of burden to carry. And also talking about, and I mentioned this before, the third shift, right? There's a lot of women, yourself included, you have multiple jobs, right? You have multiple jobs, so they're working a full-time job off the farm. Lots of times they need to, supplement the income. They need healthcare, they need all that. They need that stuff to keep the farm viable. So they're doing all of that work, but then they're also coming home and farming full-time, right? So they're doing those 2 jobs, and then you throw children on top of that, and then the primary parent. They've got they're going to ball practice and hockey practice, and they're going to parent-teacher interviews, they're volunteering at the school, the 4-H leaders. They are working a lot. And that is a lot of hats, a lot of stress, and a lot for one person to carry. So women on the farm, I have nothing but respect when people say I'm a farm wife. You are. That's fine. But you're also many, many, many other things. You are all sorts of things. And you are doing so much for so many people. And sometimes you get forgotten, right? That you as a person get forgotten. Your health, your well-being, your mental health sometimes goes to the back burner. And that is not okay, nor is it safe for women on the farm.
Robin, I think we just have to take a minute, to all, myself included, be misty about that, because sometimes, hearing that from somebody and that acknowledgement that is literally how many hats you are wearing in a 24-hour basis on any given day is a lot. And to hear that and to have it recognized causes me great overwhelm. And I know it is causing other people overwhelm as well. So we're just going to take a minute to acknowledge that. But it is so true. And the parts that you're saying about we don't need pink coveralls, we just need things that fit. We just need things that we are able to physically move or have the ability to physically do this, right? I've always found it, such a double-edged sword. As a woman who would identify as stubbornly independent, to have to ask for help for something that's either physical or, emotional or any of those things, it takes a lot. But to have people surrounding you and to have partnerships and to have businesses that you're able to help one another with these things, I think is super important. And I think at the end of the day, it has to come back to the conversations. Unfortunately, like you said, a lot of it falls on the women to have these conversations about health and safety. You're basically, the hat that you're wearing is the health and safety coordinator, but that also includes you in that conversation. To have that conversation, say, I can't do all of this. I can't have a 3-year-old at home being watched by so-and-so because I need to go do this. What are ways that we can work around this, right? And to be able to have the language and the conversations to have this, and to know it's okay to say, this isn't working for me. We need to figure out in our family, in our business, what are the tools that we can use to get through this season, right? To keep everyone safe.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think it might be a farmer thing. I'm not totally sure. But like this idea that we're silos, right? That we're just so strong and independent. We can just do everything by ourselves. I am really guilty of this. My husband is like, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, it's fine. I've got this ladder and I got the bucket. I can do this. It's fine. And he's like, what? And I go, oh, right. You're right. I need to stop and take a minute and go, oh yeah, you know what? I need some help. And it's okay because everybody needs help, and being able to offer that help freely as well and be like, hey, that's okay. I think that that's really, really important. You like you said, it's so interesting to see, folks that are, women especially, right, that just take on those burdens and kind of sometimes forget about that they're included in that too, right? That they're important. Self-care, and self-care isn't just taking a bubble bath. It's also being like, I gotta go to the doctor. Oh gosh, I need to make sure my boots fit. Those sorts of things, right? Like that kind of self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have to find a hat to cover this long hair that I swear every man in agriculture, if you have long hair and walk near an implement, it is their duty and right to tell you about how dangerous your long hair is, which is true, but that is a joke amongst the women on the farm. It's like, yes, I know. That's why it's tied back in a hat, like away from where it can get snagged.
I mean, I appreciate that they're understanding entanglement hazards. No, don't get me wrong.
Yeah. I knew you would be.
But then let's have a conversation about your ratty coveralls there, Bob.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also an entanglement hazard.
Your shoes are untied currently.
Yeah, exactly. That is also a tripping hazard. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let me help you with that, Bob. Robin, you mentioned before, we talk a lot about the horror stories and the sad stories that happen with farm safety. You did mention one before, but what are some standout moments or success stories that have really reaffirmed your commitment to improving farm safety for Canadians?
I think, those things have always been a bit of a reinvigorating moment, being like, I really wish that we didn't hear about any of these things. I really do. I really wish it was like, nobody's ever been entrapped in grain. And, and I'd be like, yeah, that's great. I would make me really happy. But hearing about those days, really understanding that training, that knowledge really made a difference. It is always just very, much, a very much a moment for me going, okay, this is worth it, right? Like, this is worth it. This is worth, the amount of work we do, with the small staff that we have, with the budgets we have, trying to get this information out there. We go, okay, that's worth it, right? That sort of thing. And I think just seeing things like, safety days for kids. We partner with Progressive Egg Foundation to have safety days for kids across Canada. And it's always really great whenever I can get out there and see a safety day happening. And seeing all these really cute little kids, wearing their Farm Safety Day t-shirts, and they're asking questions about the tractor, or they're asking questions about the ATV, or they're asking questions about the railroad, and they're really engaged and excited to learn about, the things in their community and their farms, that, could be potential hazards for them. And I think that that's always really exciting, to see kids engaged like that and people engaged. And, even just having conversations, like having a conversation with you, Keelan, honestly, like having these conversations and sitting with that lady, and talking about that incident that happened to her, and being able to be that listening ear occasionally when people want to talk about stuff like this. Because, I get it. I totally understand where people are coming from. Like, we listen, we don't judge. Right? Like, it's a great meme. Like, it is, because people are doing the best with what they've got. And I just want people to have more so they can do better, so that their farms can be better, they can be better, and they can be safe for their entire lives. And then they die 99 years of age in their bed, surrounded by their loved ones, having lived the most beautiful and wonderful life.
Absolutely. I love that. And it is the perfect meme for your organization. We listen and we don't judge. Because truly, I think when we know better, we do better, right? And hopefully we know better by not experiencing some of these accidents or safety hazards or anything like that. We just learn from other people sharing their stories. We learn from, minor incidents that have happened, and like, what can we do better next time? Because literally accidents do happen, right? And there are things that are preventable, and then there's other things that just happen, right? And we all get through it and we learn from it, right? And being able to share these stories and to share your expertise, I think, is so important, because farm safety does affect us all. And it's something that, unfortunately, I don't think we think enough about, but it is something that's a super important conversation to have.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think I honestly think most incidences are completely preventable, and I think it's things like just looking at things with new eyes, even. I think that really is helpful. It's helpful to me anyways. There are we have one, the Canada Farm Safe Plan, but there are fantastic resources out there for folks that want to do a hazard assessment on their farm, and that maybe can be like doing a walkabout and being like, okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that was actually a problem, but that's an easy fix. Oh, that's not so problem. That's not so bad. We can actually, make that change. So I think there is a way to prevent so many incidences and injuries. I think there is. It's just a matter of being like, what's important? What does our time look like? Where do we put this in the scheme of things? Those sorts of things, right? So, it's not easy. It is an investment. I'm not, and no judgment, right? Like like I said, we do the best with what we got. And sometimes we just have this much energy. Sometimes we have way more energy. Sometimes we just have this much time. Sometimes we have lots more time. But we do the best we can with what we've got at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are some future plans or developments that you can share with us in regards to CASA and farm safety in Canada?
Well, we are, like I said, we're going to be launching Kids Farm Safe Week. It's the third week in May, so I would really encourage everybody to check out the website. We're really lucky to have a great partner with BASF, and they have their Safety Scouts program, which is a fantastic program. It's a great way to get families talking about safety. You can order a kit from them, and you get a little vest for your kids. They get a little program. They can talk about Safety Scouts, and it's a really fun way to get families talking about farm safety. So that's part of the Farm Safe Kids week that's coming out. CASA always has downloadable resources for children as well on our Kids Farm Safe page. We're also working towards an online conference or a conference. We're not totally sure exactly what that's going to look like coming out in the fall. So if anybody wants to learn more about our conference, keep an eye on our website. We also host forums on the regular. So we're actually having a really interesting one coming up on May 14th with Elma Jordan from Agri Kids out of Ireland. And she's going to be talking about, the challenges that they face with farm safety for kids as well. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing in the next, 6 to 8 months, and working on our next funding ask as well. So that's in the works. So trying to understand where we need to be focusing our attention. But of course, things like Canadian Cultural Safety Week and CARE, Kids Safety Week, Be Grain Safe are all really flagship programs that we are continuing to work on as we go forward.
Absolutely. So many good things that you and your small but mighty team are doing with all of your partners. And as a Canadian farmer, I just want to say thank you for the work that you do and keeping us safe and keeping us aware. My last question for you, Robin, that I always ask folks is, what is the most rewarding part about keeping farmers safe for you?
I think that's just it, keeping farms safe, right? I love going to a farm show and seeing a farm family just walking around, right? I go, man, that is so wonderful. I love that. Like, something about that just makes me so happy. I love that so much. I love going out to my brothers, their farms, and I love seeing their kids just growing up on that farm. I love that so much. I just think about, the work that we do and why we do it. And we do it for those folks, right? We do it for those folks that are, working so hard every day, and nose to the grindstone, not a lot of thanks, a lot of times, a lot of stress and a lot of just really tough stuff that they have to work through. And I think, man, that's who we do it for. We do it for those people. And so that for me is so rewarding. And I'm so excited. It's seeding season's coming up here right away, and seeing those machines work in those fields, and seeing those people driving down the road, giving a wave, That's who we do this for every day.
So good. So good. Robin, for the folks who would like to connect with you and CASA after the show, where can they find you online?
They can check us out on our website at casa-acsa.ca. And we're also on the Meta platform, so Facebook and Instagram at Plan Farm Safety. They can also find us on LinkedIn. So we'd love a follow, a message, and you can email me from our website as well. So, happy to hear from anybody. If we can help in any way, we'd love to do so.
Perfect. And I will link all of those, including the hub with all of the resources in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Thank you again so much for sharing your story with us today and keeping us safe. Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate everything that you're doing and getting these messages out there. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.